It happened so quickly that my mind almost could not keep up with what my body felt. One second, I was carrying a tray of fruit to the dining table where my family sat, pretending that this was just another ordinary afternoon. The next second, I felt the sharp slam of my pregnant belly being shoved hard against the cold wall of my own hallway. The air was knocked out of me. My hands instinctively flew to my stomach, pressing, protecting. My knees buckled, but I did not fall because some desperate force kept me upright. The voice that followed cut deeper than the physical pain. My sister Shayla leaned close, her breath warm and her tone as icy as glass. "Do not block the way," she said. It was not shouted. It was not screamed. It was said with the kind of casual disdain you might use on a piece of furniture that had become inconvenient. My unborn daughter kicked inside me at that very moment, as if she too felt the insult. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My mother Helen, sitting only a few steps away, did not gasp, did not rush to me, did not scold Shayla. Instead, she adjusted the napkin on her lap as if nothing significant had happened. I looked at her face and saw the same expression I had seen all my life. One that told me I should not make a fuss. One that told me that whatever had just happened was already my fault. David, my husband, started to rise from his chair. Anger etched into every line of his body, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. I wanted to face this myself. My whole body trembled, not just from the pain in my abdomen, but from the tidal wave of emotions trying to burst free. Shock, fear, rage, and beneath it all, a terrifying clarity. My sister had not only shoved me, she had shoved my unborn child, the two of us pressed against a wall like obstacles in her path. Shayla smiled a cold, crooked smile, believing she had reminded me of my place. She thought I would cry out or shout or beg for an apology. That was always the script in our family. She played the aggressor, I played the weak one. Not this time. I steadied my breathing, pushed myself upright, and I did not scream. I did not weep. Instead, I smiled back at her, the kind of smile that holds a storm inside. My voice, when it came, was calm, so calm it startled even me. "You just touched two lives, not one." The words hung in the air like a blade. For the first time in as long as I could remember, Shayla's face lost its certainty. Her smirk faltered. Her eyes flickered down toward my stomach, then back up to my face. She froze. Silence spread across the room, thick and heavy. Even Helen's composure cracked for a second, a flash of discomfort passing over her features. David's chair scraped against the floor, but I did not need him to say a word. I had said enough. It would have been easy to lash out, to accuse, to scream at the injustice. But what I gave them was far more unsettling. A reminder that I carried not just myself, but an innocent child, and that Shayla's cruelty had reached beyond me. For a moment, the power shifted, and I saw the unease in her stance, the way she held herself suddenly uncertain. She had not expected this. She had not expected me to stay standing, to stay calm, to strike with words sharper than any scream. And though her lips parted as if to defend herself, nothing came out. She was frozen, caught in the truth of what she had done. I know you are probably wondering how it ever came to this, how a sister could push her pregnant sibling against a wall and believe it was acceptable, how a mother could sit in silence as if this were no more serious than a spilled drink. If I do not tell you the full story, you will think I am inventing drama for effect, but I promise you this happened, and it did not start in that hallway. It started years ago in a childhood built on silence favoritism and the kind of invisible violence that carves itself into your bones. If you want to understand why I smiled that day instead of screaming why, my one sentence made my sister pale, you need to step back with me into the past. Because the truth is, that moment in the hallway was not sudden at all. It was decades in the making. My name is Catherine. I am 30 years old, and until recently, I believed I had learned to manage the chaos of my family. I work as an accountant, the kind of job that requires long hours of quiet calculation, a job that gave me the stability I always craved after a childhood of instability. I live in a modest but warm home with my husband David, a man whose patience and steadiness have been my anchor for years. At the moment, I am 7 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter who has already changed the way I see the world. Her kicks inside me remind me that I am not only living for myself anymore. Every decision I make now, every person I allow near me affects her too. David and I had been excited for this new chapter. We painted the nursery a soft shade of lavender, assembled the crib together, laughed about how clueless we were when trying to install the car seat. For the first time in my life, I felt the kind of security that comes not from money or appearances, but from genuine love. But family, as I have learned, has a way of reaching into your happiness and twisting it until you doubt yourself again. My mother, Helen, is 55, a woman who has always believed that strength comes from control, and control comes from favoritism. She raised me and my sister Shayla after my father died when I was 10. You might think tragedy would have brought us closer together, but it only deepened the cracks. Helen clung to Shayla as if she were porcelain, fragile and precious, while I became the dependable one, the one who had to be strong, the one who had to sacrifice. If Shayla cried, I was told to soothe her. If she broke something, I was blamed for upsetting her. It was an arrangement carved into our family life so deeply that even now, decades later, my mother defends Shayla no matter what she does. Shayla is 32, 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she has lived as if the world owes her more than it gives. She has a sharp tongue and a quick temper, but what makes her truly dangerous is her ability to make cruelty look casual. To her, insults are jokes, betrayals are misunderstandings, and violence is just a moment of passion that others should forgive. She married young to a man named Mark, but their marriage has been stormy. They have one child, Brooklyn, a sweet girl caught between parents who are too busy fighting to notice how deeply she longs for peace. Mark often works late to avoid arguments, leaving Shayla to vent her frustrations on anyone available, which often means me. When I announced my pregnancy, Shayla's smile never reached her eyes. She said the right words out loud, but her tone was sharp, her hugs stiff. Later, she joked that I was just trying to one-up her because Brooklyn was getting older and I wanted attention again. My mother laughed along with her as if this was just sisterly banter, but I felt the sting of it settle deep. From that moment, I knew every milestone of my pregnancy would become a new opportunity for their resentment. And I was right. When David and I bought a new crib, Shayla called it showing off. When I mentioned feeling the baby kick for the first time, Helen told me not to make a big deal because it might upset Shayla, who was having trouble in her own marriage. Even something as small as sharing an ultrasound picture turned into an argument. Shayla scoffed that it was creepy, and Helen nodded as if agreeing was the most natural thing in the world. Slowly, I realized that my daughter, not even born yet, had already been drafted into the same toxic dynamic that had poisoned my childhood. I wanted to believe I could shield her from it, but how do you shield a baby from family when family is supposed to be your safe place? The gathering that day, the one where Shayla shoved me, was not unusual. My mother had suggested a small lunch at our house. David had hesitated, but I agreed, thinking maybe things could be civil. I prepared food, set the table, and tried to convince myself it would be fine. But the moment Shayla walked in, I felt the air change. She scanned the room like a queen inspecting her subjects, her eyes lingering on the baby items tucked in the corner, the neatly folded blankets, the rocking chair David had built. Disdain flickered across her face, and I braced myself. Helen followed behind her carrying a cake, as if that gesture erased years of cruelty. We sat together, the four of us, pretending for a short time that we were a family sharing a meal. But underneath every word, every look, I could feel the old script being rehearsed. Shayla the center, Helen the defender, me the scapegoat. David sat beside me, quiet but alert, his hand brushing mine under the table. He knew as well as I did that it was only a matter of time before the mask slipped. And slip it did. It slipped in the hallway when I tried to carry fruit to the table and my sister decided I was in her way. That was the moment the old script collided with the new reality. I was no longer a frightened child absorbing the blows of a spoiled sibling. I was a woman, a wife, a mother-to-be, and I was done playing their game. That day marked the start of a reckoning they never saw coming. When I look back on my childhood, it feels like a long hallway lined with eggshells, each step I took ready to crack beneath me. I was only 8 years old when I realized that peace in our house depended on how quiet I could make myself. My sister Shayla came into the world 2 years before me, and from the moment she learned to cry, she mastered the art of bending everyone around her. When she wanted something, she screamed. When she lost, she wailed, and when she broke something, she pointed her finger at me. The terrifying part was not her tantrums, but my mother Helen's reaction to them. Most mothers might correct the tantrum, teach their child to calm down, maybe hand out discipline. My mother turned instead to me. Why did you not let her win Catherine? Why did you upset her? Why did you make her so angry she threw it? Those sentences became the wallpaper of my youth. I remember one Christmas vividly. I was 10 and had saved my allowance for weeks. I walked to the small store in town and bought Shayla a necklace. It was nothing extravagant, just a tiny silver chain with a blue heart charm. I was proud imagining her surprise when she opened it. But when she tore off the wrapping paper and saw the color, her face twisted. She screeched that she hated blue, wanted pink, that I always ruined everything. Before I could say a word, she yanked the chain apart until it snapped. My mother gasped not at the destruction, but at me. You knew she wanted pink. Why would you get blue? I stood there holding the crumpled box while Shayla smirked behind her tears, the victor once again. Another memory carved into me was the time Shayla broke my favorite doll. It had been given to me by an aunt, and I treasured it, brushing its hair each night. One afternoon, Shayla stormed into my room, grabbed the doll, and twisted its head until it came loose. I shouted in horror. My mother rushed in and asked what had happened. Shayla pointed at me and said I had teased her. Helen sighed heavily and told me to apologize. Apologize to her not for the doll, but for upsetting her so much she had to break it. That was the logic of our home. If Shayla did something cruel, the cruelty was justified by my failure to keep her calm. Imagine growing up that way. You learn to be hyper-aware of every expression, every tone of voice. You learn to give in before battles start. You learn that your own wants are dangerous because they can trigger an explosion. By the time I was a teenager, I had perfected the art of self-erasure. I let Shayla win games even when I was smarter or faster. I gave her my clothes even when I liked them because if I kept them, she would find a way to destroy them. She called me names, sometimes whispered them in my ear so no one else would hear, sometimes shouted them across the kitchen so my mother could nod in agreement. And every time I swallowed it down because fighting back only made things worse. School became my refuge. At school, I could earn grades, I could be recognized for effort, and I could imagine a world where fairness existed. When I was accepted into advanced classes, I glowed with pride. That glow lasted until I came home and told my mother. She frowned, glanced at Shayla, and said, "Do not brag, you will make your sister feel bad." The pride shrank back into shame. The pattern repeated in different forms over and over. When I got a part in a school play, Shayla complained that no one paid attention to her. My mother skipped the performance. When I brought home a certificate, Shayla cried that she never got awards. My mother folded the certificate away in a drawer. It was as if my accomplishments were invisible, erased for the sake of maintaining Shayla's delicate balance. There were darker moments too, the times when Shayla's jealousy tipped into something physical. Once, when we were teenagers, she shoved me down the stairs after I wore a sweater she liked. I landed hard, bruised, and breathless. But my mother told me I should not have borrowed something that made Shayla angry. Another time, Shayla locked me outside in the rain while she and her friends laughed inside. I knocked on the door shivering until finally Helen opened it and scolded me for making a scene. The lesson was always the same. Your pain does not matter, only Shayla's feelings matter. That truth settled into my bones, shaping me. I grew quieter, more careful, more determined to escape. By the time I was 17, I had one thought burning in me like a hidden flame. I would get out. I would study work, build a life where Shayla's screams could not reach me and Helen's excuses could not diminish me. I poured myself into books, into after-school jobs, into scholarships. Each small success felt like a step toward freedom. Yet even then, the guilt followed. When I left for college on a scholarship, Helen told me to call often because Shayla would miss me. When Shayla failed classes, Helen asked me to tutor her long distance. When Shayla racked up credit card debt, Helen hinted that I should help. I did help sometimes out of habit, out of the old conditioning that my role was to fix everything. But resentment was growing inside me thick and hot. I had fought for every inch of progress while Shayla coasted on indulgence and pity. And still, my mother acted as though I owed them more. Looking back now, I see how perfectly the stage was set. Years of favoritism, of misplaced blame, of silence when there should have been outrage. It created the woman Shayla became entitled and cruel, and it created me quiet but watchful, capable of endurance and eventually of resistance. People often ask why someone would put up with family who treats them this way. The answer is simple. When it starts in childhood, it feels normal. It feels inevitable. You think if you just try harder, stay quieter, sacrifice more, maybe things will be peaceful. But peace never came. Not in childhood, not in adolescence, not even when I became an adult with my own home. Shayla always found ways to invade, and my mother always found ways to defend her. It was only when I carried life inside me, only when I realized I was about to bring a daughter into this world, that I understood I could not let the cycle continue. My child would not grow up walking on eggshells the way I had. She would not learn that love means swallowing pain for the sake of someone else's temper. She would not see her mother silenced by fear. That promise to myself had been simmering long before the day Shayla shoved me into the wall. That day was simply the moment it boiled over. And though it looked sudden to outsiders, though it might have seemed like a single cruel act in an otherwise ordinary family lunch, I knew better. That shove carried the weight of decades of bruises, tears, and silences. It was not just a moment. It was the climax of a story that had begun the day I was born into a house where one child's pain was always invisible, and the other's tantrums were treated as gospel. That is why I smiled instead of screaming. That is why one sentence from my lips made my sister freeze, because it was not the voice of a frightened little girl anymore. It was the voice of a woman who had survived all of it and finally refused to bow. Pregnancy should be a time when a woman is surrounded with care and encouragement, but for me, it became the stage where every old wound was reopened. The day I told my mother Helen and my sister Shayla that I was expecting, David squeezed my hand under the table, proud and protective. Shayla's smile was brief and brittle. She said congratulations, but her eyes carried a spark of disdain. Later, she muttered that I had only gotten pregnant because I was bored and needed attention. Helen chuckled as if it were just playful teasing, but I felt the barb sink deep. From that moment, each step of my pregnancy became an excuse for criticism. When David and I bought a new crib, Shayla sneered that we were showing off. Helen agreed, telling me that babies did not need fancy things and that Shayla had managed just fine with less. When I announced that the baby kicked for the first time, Shayla rolled her eyes and Helen told me not to gloat because it might hurt Shayla's feelings. Even something as ordinary as posting an ultrasound photo turned into an argument. Shayla called it creepy. Helen nodded and I was left with a lump in my throat where joy should have been. The weight of their disapproval hung over me like storm clouds. Instead of celebrating, I felt like I was apologizing for existing. Still, I tried to maintain peace, convincing myself that if I stayed calm, they would eventually soften. But each interaction only confirmed that the family script remained unchanged. Shayla took center stage. Helen defended her, and I was expected to swallow the pain. There was one afternoon that stands out clearly. I had invited Shayla and her daughter Brooklyn over for tea. Brooklyn is a sweet child close in age to the little girl growing inside me. She ran through the nursery David and I had prepared, her eyes wide with wonder at the pastel walls and stuffed animals. For a moment, I saw innocence untainted by rivalry. But when Shayla noticed the admiration on her daughter's face, her jaw tightened. She scolded Brooklyn sharply for touching the crib, pulling her away as though my nursery were a weapon. Later, Shayla whispered that I was cruel to flaunt what I had, that I knew she and Mark were having problems, and yet I dared to show my happiness. Her words stung, but what broke me was Helen's agreement. She said I should be more considerate, that family means being sensitive to one another. Sensitive in her dictionary meant silencing myself for Shayla's comfort. That evening, I sat in the half-finished nursery and cried quietly while David painted. He stopped and pulled me into his arms. Enough is enough, he whispered. You do not owe them your happiness. But conditioning is strong, and part of me still believed I had to keep trying. As the months passed, the slights became sharper. At a family dinner, Shayla laughed loudly about how I was waddling like a duck. Helen joined in. At another gathering, Shayla claimed David would leave once he realized how exhausting I was. Helen told me to ignore it, but her eyes glimmered with approval at Shayla's cruelty. I began to document these moments in small ways. I saved text messages where they belittled me. I placed a discreet camera in our living room and hallway ostensibly for security, but also because I had started to fear that words alone would never capture the truth of what they were capable of. The turning point came when David's parents invited us for dinner, and Shayla showed up unannounced. She monopolized the evening, mocking me interrupting whenever I tried to speak. When David's mother finally asked her to let me finish a sentence, Shayla snapped that everyone always babied me. I saw the flicker of shame in David's parents' eyes and felt a new determination rise inside me. It was not just about enduring anymore. It was about protecting my child from growing up in the same suffocating environment. Then came the request that revealed everything. Shayla called late one night demanding money. She said Mark had left after a fight and she needed help paying bills. I hesitated, explaining that David and I were saving for the baby, but before I could finish, she exploded. "You think you are better than me!" she screamed. "You think your perfect husband and your perfect baby make you superior!" My mother's voice came on the line next, cold and firm. "Catherine," she said, "do not abandon your sister. Family helps family." I stared at the phone, heart pounding. "Family helps family." The phrase echoed with bitter irony. Where was that help when I was shoved, insulted, erased? That night, I decided something quietly. I would keep helping in one way, but not the way they expected. I would help by exposing the truth, by refusing to let them twist the story again. When Helen suggested a lunch at my house a week later, I agreed. David asked if I was sure. I nodded, but inside I was resolved. This would not be another meal where I bit my tongue until it bled. This would be the moment I showed them I was no longer a child playing the scapegoat. The morning of the gathering, I prepared the food, set the table, and checked the camera batteries twice. My heart raced, but it was not the old fear anymore. It was anticipation, the sense that something inevitable was approaching. When Shayla walked in, she looked around with disdain, her eyes darting to the baby blankets, the rocking chair, the ultrasound photo on the fridge. Helen followed, wearing that air of judgment that had never left her. We sat together, David beside me, his hand on my knee. Conversation was stilted, filled with barbed remarks disguised as jokes. Shayla asked if I was ready to lose sleep forever. Helen commented that some women were not cut out for motherhood. Each word was meant to pierce, but instead of crumbling, I let them wash over me. When I stood to carry fruit to the table, I felt Shayla's eyes on me. The moment in the hallway happened swiftly, brutally, her shove against my pregnant belly, sealing the years of cruelty into one physical act. But what they did not know was that the moment she touched me, she also crossed a boundary that had been forming inside me for decades. They believed they were reenacting the old script where Shayla inflicted harm. Helen excused it, and I endured. But the escalation they did not see was that I had been gathering strength, evidence, and resolve. This was not just another humiliation. It was the spark that would ignite everything. That shove was the culmination of every insult, every dismissal, every moment when my pain was deemed irrelevant. And as I steadied myself against the wall, hand pressed to my stomach, I understood with perfect clarity that the cycle ended here. Not for me, for my daughter. For the life kicking inside me who deserved a world where cruelty was not rewarded and silence was not survival. What none of them realized in that moment was that I was ready. I was no longer simply Catherine the scapegoat. I was Catherine the mother, and I was prepared to fight back with something they could not control: truth, evidence, and the power of finally refusing to play my assigned role. The escalation was complete. The reckoning was about to begin. The moment Shayla's hands pressed into my side and my pregnant belly collided with the wall will live in me forever, like a scar etched on the inside. My body jolted with pain, my breath caught, and the sound of my own gasp filled the hallway. For a split second, I thought I might collapse, but some primal instinct forced me upright, my arms instinctively wrapping around my stomach. I looked up and saw her face satisfied cold, as if she had done nothing more than push aside a chair in her path. "Don't block the way," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, and the words were sharper than the shove itself. The air was thick with silence. Silence from my mother, Helen, who sat nearby. Silence from David, who tensed beside the table. Silence from the walls themselves, as if the house had grown still to witness what had just been done. Helen broke the silence, not with outrage, not with compassion, but with her usual blame. "Well, you should not stand in the middle when you are pregnant," she muttered, folding her arms as if she had delivered a reasonable verdict. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, the way cruelty was always repackaged as my fault. David began to rise, fury burning in his eyes, but I held up my hand. I would not let this moment dissolve into chaos. Not this time. I forced myself to straighten, feeling the sting in my ribs, the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears, and I did something they never expected. I smiled. A calm, steady smile that carried every ounce of pain and endurance I had learned over 30 years. My voice was level, almost gentle, but each word struck like a blade. "You just touched 2 lives, not 1. The words echoed, hanging in the air, heavier than any scream could have. Shayla's smirk faltered, her eyes darting to my stomach and then back to my face. Realization dawning that she had crossed a line too visible to deny. She froze. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. Even Helen's posture shifted, a flicker of unease breaking through her mask of indifference. For once, they had no script ready, no quick dismissal, no way to twist what had just happened. David's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood ready to defend me, but I did not need him to speak. The silence belonged to me now. I held it, let it stretch, let them squirm inside it. My mind replayed decades of insults, bruises, slights, all culminating in this one act. The shove was not just physical, it was symbolic, a declaration that I was still the obstacle, still the scapegoat. And yet the irony was that with those words I had flipped the script. They were the ones cornered now. Shayla opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to deny, but nothing came. Her lips moved without sound, her confidence shattered. She looked suddenly small, caught in the truth she could not twist. I could feel the power shift in the room. For years, I had been the one frozen, the one silenced, the one blamed. Now it was her turn. I wanted to savor it, but I also wanted to make it clear that I was not playing their game anymore. I turned slowly toward Helen, meeting her eyes with a steadiness I had never dared before. "You think this is my fault too," I said quietly. She stiffened, ready to lecture, but the words did not come. My calmness unnerved her. She glanced at Shayla as if searching for an ally, but Shayla's frozen expression offered nothing. David stepped forward, his presence strong, his voice low but firm. "Enough," he said, his eyes fixed on both of them. "This is not happening again." But it was not his words that pierced them. It was mine. That one sentence, spoken without anger, without tears, carried more weight than years of shouting ever could, because it reminded them that they had not just pushed me. They had endangered an innocent child. It was no longer a matter of family politics or sibling rivalry. It was life. And in that realization they froze, caught in the mirror of their own cruelty. For once, they could not hide. For once, they had to face what they had done. That was the climax, the breaking point. A silence so sharp it felt like glass, a moment that shifted the balance forever. I had spoken, and they were pale with the truth of it. In the hours after the hallway incident, the silence between us was heavy, but it did not last. Shayla retreated into herself, eyes darting with calculation, and Helen quickly regained her composure, smoothing her skirt and declaring that I was overreacting. David guided me to the couch and placed a pillow behind my back, his hand hovering near my shoulder as if to shield me from the weight of their stares. I said nothing. The words I had spoken, "You just touched 2 lives, not 1, were still ringing in the air, and that was enough. But I knew them too well to believe the matter would end there. By the next morning, my phone began buzzing with messages from cousins and aunts. At first, they were simple, asking if I was all right, But then the tone shifted. Some asked why I had accused Shayla of violence. Others wondered if perhaps pregnancy hormones had made me exaggerate. Confusion spread like smoke, and I knew exactly who had lit the fire. Helen and Shayla had already begun rewriting the story. In their version, I had stumbled clumsily. Shayla had brushed past me innocently, and I had turned it into melodrama. They portrayed themselves as victims of my sensitivity, insisting I was unstable, craving sympathy. My anger simmered, but I did not lash out. Instead, I began collecting. The hallway camera had captured everything, the exact shove, the exact words, my body jerking forward and my hands clutching my belly. I downloaded the footage, saving it carefully to multiple files. I scrolled through my phone and found the text exchanges where Helen had excused cruelty, where Shayla had mocked me for preparing a nursery, where they both accused me of selfishness. Piece by piece, I assembled the puzzle evidence that their narrative was not only false, but malicious. David watched me quietly, his jaw tight, but when I showed him the footage, his eyes softened with pride. "You finally have what they cannot deny," he said. I nodded. It was time. That evening, the family group chat exploded with chatter. Helen had posted a long message lamenting how I had humiliated them, claiming Shayla had only brushed my arm, and that I had screamed like a victim. Cousins responded with sympathy for Shayla, a few added emojis of support. My stomach turned as I read the lies. Then I pressed send. Into that chat, I dropped the video unedited, uncut, raw. Shayla's hands pushing me, my body hitting the wall, her cold voice saying, "Do not block the way," and my words that followed. I added only one sentence beneath the clip. "For the record, this is what really happened." The chat went silent for 1 long minute. Then came the eruption. Messages flew in rapid bursts. "What? Oh my God, I cannot believe this. How could she?" Relatives who had always stayed neutral were suddenly outraged. Aunts demanded explanations. Cousins typed in all caps. One even asked if I was going to the police. I sat on the couch with the phone buzzing beside me, David's arm around my shoulders, and for the first time in my life, I felt the shift of power away from them and toward me. The fallout was swift. Helen called within the hour, her voice sharp with fury. "How dare you post that?" she hissed. "You ruined your sister's reputation." I almost laughed. "She ruined herself," I said. I only pressed play. Shayla called next, her tone panicked, insisting it had been a joke, that I had taken it out of context. I let her words spill into the air without answering. The truth was already louder than her excuses. Extended family began calling too, some apologizing for believing the earlier lies, others stunned into silence. One cousin sent me a private message. "Catherine, I always thought you exaggerated, but seeing that video broke my heart. Stay safe." That message made me cry, not because it fixed anything, but because for once, someone believed me without twisting it. But the exposure spread further than our family chat. Someone forwarded the clip to neighbors, another uploaded it to Facebook, and soon the comments poured in. "Who does that to a pregnant woman? This is abuse. Someone tag CPS." The public nature of it terrified Shayla. For once, she could not hide behind whispers or half-truths. Even Mark, her husband, who often avoided confrontation, called me directly. His voice was flat but heavy. "Is it real?" he asked. I told him it was. He was silent for a long moment before exhaling slowly. "Thank you," he said, and hung up. I did not hear from him again that night, but 2 days later, word reached me that he had filed for divorce and custody of Brooklyn. The exposure had consequences I could not have orchestrated more perfectly. Shayla lost credibility not only with family, but with the community. Parents at Brooklyn's school whispered, neighbors pulled away, friends unfriended her online. Helen tried desperately to spin new narratives claiming the video was edited, that stress had clouded my judgment, but the evidence was too clear. Her words sounded hollow even to those who had once defended her. For the first time in decades, they were the ones scrambling, the ones cornered, while I remained silent, calm, steady. David told me I had done enough, that I did not need to respond to every message, that the truth was out and I could rest. But resting was not what this moment demanded. It demanded a clean cut, a clear boundary. So I went further. I logged into the shared accounts I had been funding utilities and groceries and streaming services my mother and sister had leaned on me for. One by one, I removed my card information. Click, click, click. Each removal was like lifting a stone from my back. By the time I finished, the buzzing of my phone had begun again. Mom, Shayla. Mom, again. The texts were frantic. Catherine, we just got a notice your card was removed. Why would you do this? Add it back. Another message followed, dripping with entitlement. What are you playing at? This is petty. Put the card back right now. I laid the phone face down on the counter, breathing deeply. For the first time, the silence in the house felt clean, not heavy. The exposure was complete. There was no turning back. My sister had shoved me, my mother had excused it, and the world had seen. They wanted me silent, but I had chosen differently. I had chosen to shine light on the ugliness they had kept hidden for years. That light was scorching now, burning them in places they could not conceal. And as I placed my hand gently on my stomach, feeling the flutter of my daughter within, I whispered a promise. You will not grow up in the shadows I did. You will know truth, and you will know that your mother once stood against cruelty and finally won. The days that followed felt like the aftershocks of an earthquake. The ground beneath my family had shifted, and none of them knew how to stand steady anymore. Shayla's calls turned from angry demands to panicked pleas. At first, she shouted at me, accusing me of betrayal, insisting that I had humiliated her in front of everyone. When I refused to respond, her tone changed. She began to cry, telling me she was sorry, telling me she had only been stressed that she had not meant to push me so hard. But her apologies were hollow because they were not about my pain or the danger to my baby. They were about her reputation and the sudden crumbling of the life she thought was untouchable. Mark served her divorce papers within a week. The video had been undeniable evidence in his petition for custody. He told the court that he feared for Brooklyn's safety, that if Shayla could shove a pregnant sister, she was capable of anything. Neighbors submitted statements, teachers whispered their concerns, and for once the chorus of voices did not defend her. It condemned her. Shayla's arrogance cracked wide open. She called me again, this time whispering furiously, "You ruined my life." I listened in silence and then hung up. Helen was no better. Her phone calls came daily, some filled with rage, others dripping with manipulation. She told me I was cruel, that I had embarrassed the family name, that I was tearing them apart. When I did not answer, she sent messages reminding me of all the times she had raised me alone after my father died, as if motherhood was a debt that excused everything. She begged me to restore the payments I had cut off. Without my financial support, her bills began to pile. The desperation in her words almost amused me. For years, I had been told I was selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. Yet here she was, pleading for my help, exposing how dependent she had become on the daughter she belittled. I did not respond. I let the silence answer for me. The extended family took sides, as families always do. Some called me brave for exposing the truth. Others said I should have kept it private, that airing dirty laundry was shameful. But even the critics could not deny what they had seen in that video. The image of Shayla shoving me, the sound of her voice telling me not to block the way, those could not be explained away. At gatherings, my absence was noted, my name spoken in hushed tones. And yet I felt lighter than I ever had. For once, I was not the scapegoat. For once, I was the one holding the evidence. David stood beside me through it all, steady as a rock. He reminded me that what mattered most was the safety of our child and the boundaries we were building. Each evening he cooked dinner, rubbed my swollen feet, and told me he was proud. When the phone buzzed with more messages, he would glance at it and shake his head. "You do not need to answer," he said, and I knew he was right. The less I engaged, the more frantic they became. The more frantic they became, the clearer it was that their power was gone. One evening, Helen showed up at my door. David saw her through the window and asked if I wanted him to send her away. I shook my head and opened the door myself. She stood there, her hair disheveled, her eyes sharp with fury, but also glazed with fear. "Catherine," she said, "we need to talk." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, making sure she could not look in and see the warmth of my home. "What is there to talk about?" I asked calmly. She clasped her hands together and tried to soften her tone. Your sister is suffering. Everyone is judging her. You can fix this. Delete the video. Tell people it was a misunderstanding. My stomach tightened with rage. A misunderstanding, I repeated. She shoved her pregnant sister into a wall. That is not a misunderstanding. That is violence. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line. People make mistakes, she said. Family forgives. I shook my head. Family protects. She did not protect me. Neither did you. Her face hardened, then the mask slipping back into place. If you cut us off, she said, do not expect us to be there for you either. I almost laughed at the irony. You were never there, I replied, and I turned and walked back into my house, closing the door softly but firmly. For the first time in my life, the door felt like a boundary, not a barrier. The consequences rippled outward. Shayla's social circle shrank. Parents no longer arranged playdates with Brooklyn. Friends stopped inviting her to dinners. At the grocery store, she felt the stares. Helen's finances collapsed without my support, forcing her to sell possessions she had once flaunted. The pedestal they had built for themselves crumbled, and they blamed me for the fall. But I knew the truth. They had built it on my silence, and once I withdrew that silence, the whole structure collapsed. At night, as I lay in bed, my hand resting on the swell of my belly, I felt my daughter shift and kick. Each movement reminded me that these consequences were not revenge. They were protection. I had not destroyed Shayla's life. She had done that herself with her cruelty. I had simply refused to hide it anymore. For years, they had relied on my silence to maintain their power. Now that silence was gone, and with it went the illusion that they could do whatever they pleased without consequence. I had finally learned that the most powerful weapon I possessed was not shouting or pleading. It was the truth spoken plainly and the refusal to carry their secrets anymore. And that truth had set me free. The storm of messages eventually slowed, though not because the anger or the blame had faded. It slowed because they realized I would not answer. My silence was not the old silence of submission. It was a new silence, deliberate and firm, the silence of boundaries drawn with steel. For the first time, I was not bracing for the next blow or the next insult. I was breathing. David and I poured our energy into preparing for our daughter. We spent evenings in the nursery folding tiny clothes, hanging curtains, testing the rocking chair until it creaked. Each task felt like an act of defiance, a declaration that love would define this home, not cruelty. Sometimes I would pause, hand on my belly, and whisper to her that she was safe, that the world waiting for her would be different from the one I had grown up in. The ache of old wounds did not disappear overnight. Memories of Shayla's jeers and Helen's dismissals still rose unbidden, but they no longer ruled me. They were reminders of where I had come from and why I could not return. One night, as I tucked myself into bed, I heard the faint ping of another message. I did not need to read it to know it was them. I turned the phone face down and listened instead to the steady rhythm of David's breathing beside me. Peace, simple and quiet, filled the room. It was fragile, but real. I understood then that family is not defined by blood alone. Family is supposed to mean protection, safety, love. When those things are absent, the word is just a mask people wear to shield themselves from accountability. I had finally ripped that mask away. Weeks later, a cousin called to check in. She told me that the video had changed the way many relatives saw things, that some were questioning Helen's influence, that others had reached out to Shayla only to be met with denial and rage. I listened quietly, thanked her, and hung up. I no longer needed validation. The truth was already out there living its own life. My task now was not to manage their reactions, but to build my own future. When my daughter was finally born, her cry filled the hospital room like the breaking of chains. I held her against my chest and felt a fierce rush of love and determination. David kissed my forehead, tears in his eyes, and I knew that whatever battles lay behind us had been worth it for this moment. I named her Grace because that was what I had finally found, the grace to walk away, the grace to stand firm, the grace to love without fear. Months later, I heard that Shayla had lost custody of Brooklyn and that Helen had moved into a smaller apartment, bitter and blaming me still. But those updates no longer pierced me. They were distant echoes, consequences of choices I had not made, but had refused to hide. My focus remained on Grace, on teaching her that love is not measured by how much pain you can endure for someone else. Love is measured by kindness, respect, and the willingness to protect. One afternoon, as I rocked Grace in the nursery, sunlight filtered through the curtains, and I thought about the path behind me. I thought of the hallway shove of the words that froze Shayla of the video that revealed everything. I thought of the years of silence and the moment I finally broke it. And I felt something I had not felt since I was a child. Clarity. Not rage, not grief, but the clear knowledge that I had done the right thing. The cycle was broken. Grace would never learn that her value depended on keeping someone else calm. She would never be told her accomplishments were shameful or her joy a provocation. She would grow in a home where her voice mattered, where her boundaries were respected, where love meant safety. That was the legacy I chose for her. As I laid her gently in her crib, I whispered the truth that had carried me this far. Blood is not an excuse. Family without respect is not family at all. Then I turned off the light and closed the door softly. The house quiet, the air clean, the future wide open.